Good morning, everyone. This is Emily from Eurelectric. Thank you for joining our webinar on building power system resilience in times of extreme weather. We have an excellent lineup to discuss this topic today. For those of you who are new to Eurelectric, Eurelectric is a trade association representing the European electricity industry in Brussels. This is the first of a two-part series on the topic of power system resilience, today focusing on extreme weather events. And in a latter webinar on 30th of September, we will focus on cyber threats to the power system. This morning's session will be moderated by Paddy Hayes, Managing Director of ESB Networks, the distribution system operator in the Republic of Ireland. And Paddy is also co-chair of the European TSO DSO platform. Our webinar on 30th of September on cyber threats to the power system will be moderated by Michael Jesberger, also co-chair of the European TSO DSO platform. If you haven't already registered for the second webinar, you can still do so via our website. With regard to a couple of housekeeping points for this morning, if time permits at the end of the webinar, we will be taking questions from the floor. You can post your question using the chat platform on the right-hand side of the screen. Please, if your question is specifically for a speaker, mention that speaker's name so that we can be sure to pass it to them. We will do our best to handle all questions, but please understand this will be down to the amount of time left. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Paddy to moderate this morning's session.
Thanks very much, Emily. Good morning, everybody. My name is Paddy Hayes. As Emily said, I'm the Managing Director of ESB Networks, the distribution system operator in the Republic of Ireland. And I'm privileged at the moment to be co-chair of the European TSO DSO platform. I'm really looking forward to Eurelectric's webinar today on building resilience in times of extreme weather. We have four fabulous guests with us this morning, each with different insights. Beatrice Sinaba is team leader for energy security and electricity at the European Commission. She brings an important perspective on risk preparedness and critical infrastructure. Laurent Schmidt is the Secretary General of ENSOE, the representative body for European transmission system operators. Laurent will bring a transmission system operator perspective. Mark McGranahan joins us from West Kerry in the west of Ireland, and he's the Vice President of Innovation at EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute. And Mark will bring insights from EPRI's ongoing Value of Resilience interest group. And finally, Gregorio Ogliaro. Gregorio is based in Milan. He's the Managing Director of Utilities for Transmission and Distribution at Accenture. And Gregorio will bring us valuable findings from Accenture's recent report from reliability to resilience. So we'll hear from Beatrice, Laurent, Mark, and Gregorio shortly. But just first then, in order to set the scene, Anne, could I have the first slide, please? And maybe the next slide, please, Anne. So just to set the scene, the Hurricane Ophelia hit Ireland in October 2017. It took out 380,000 customers from the Irish system. That's about 17% of our customers at its peak. You can see from our online monitoring system in the top right that all of the regions in the Republic of Ireland at that stage were red in terms of the fault and the fault response. The main damage you can see below was caused by trees. Some of our customers were out for up to 6 days, and in total we lost almost 12 million customer hours. Some customers lost more than electricity. You can see in the bottom right a picture from one of Ireland's cider orchards. But it's a really serious business. And as we experience more extreme weather, whether that's storms or floods, heat, wildfire, extreme cold, we understand that resilience becomes increasingly important, resilience for the electricity networks. And could I have the next slide, please? So if the weather does take the network out, the restoration, preparation, and capability is key. EPRI published a really nice paper in early 2018. You can see it referenced there, which looked at Ireland and ESB Networks' restoration response to Hurricane Ophelia. And we drew on cooperation from a number of sister companies, sister network companies from across the UK, and a big shout out also to Enedis from France, who provide us with incredible support at very, very short notice to restore the system. You can see the restoration curve on the bottom right. You can see how many customers we got back very early within the first 12 hours or so, but equally the longer tail as the smaller faults needed to be resolved and corrected. I suppose no matter how well we're doing with the restoration at any given point in time, it's really pointless unless customers understand what it is that we're doing and have an understanding of how soon the electricity network is going to be back for them, and that they understand that we're doing everything that we can for them. So you can see in top right our call center, and we used emergency call centers and doubled and tripled the volume of our call center staff in order to respond to this. But equally, there are opportunities for much more digital interactions now on restoration. Could I have the next slide, please, Anne? Of course, as clean electricity plays its part in climate action, increasingly we're relying on clean electricity to take the carbon out of heat and transport and other parts of the economy. And of course, with that, resilient supply of electricity becomes even more fundamentally important. It's not just heat and transport, of course, it's communications as well, it's Wi-Fi and it's battery and things that have become fundamentals of human life. And I guess we can conclude that increasingly resilience is becoming increasingly more valuable. Next slide, please, Anne. So just to sum it up and set the scene for our panelists today, with extreme weather, certainly my perspective on it is, it really is about prevention. The implications of extreme weather are increasing as economies worldwide start to depend even more on electricity. The restoration effort is absolutely critical in terms of capability and preparedness, and equally understanding that people are involved with this and that communications is really important throughout that is another key dimension. Of course, for each of these aspects, there are implications for policy, for investment, for technology and digital, for research and innovation, and I think also for community and cooperation. So for me, those are the key factors, and I think that each of our four panelists today is going to touch on some aspects of those as they go through their talk. So hopefully it sets the scene. First of all, Beatrice Sinoba. Beatrice, who's the team leader for energy security and electricity at the European Commission, will bring us an important perspective now on risk preparedness and critical infrastructure protection. Over to you, Beatrice.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Good morning to you and good morning to all participants. Thank you very much for having me here today to talk about an legal EU instrument on risk preparedness. And to give you a bit of a context, Anne, could you please show the first slide? So the risk preparedness regulation is part of the clean energy package, and it comes in a moment where weather events, climate change is contributing significantly to more extreme and difficult to predict weather events. And also we have cyber attacks and hybrid threats, which are reaching increasingly wider consequences. So in this context, what the risk preparedness regulation aims at doing is at ensuring that all member states put in place the proper measures to address all this risk associated to extreme weather events and to increase the resilience of the network, and they do so in cooperation. And cooperation is particularly important when we are talking about extreme weather events, because if let's take, for example, a heat wave. If a country is suffering a heat wave, it is very likely that your neighbor is also going to be facing a challenging situation because of a heat wave. So factoring this in when you are designing your strategies to face risks is essential for a successful outcome. So what this regulation does to have this cooperation and to start to provide a common starting point is it required NSOE to develop a methodology to identify regional crisis scenarios. This methodology was prepared by NSOE and approved by ASA. And NSOE has applied it and recently come up with the first set of regional crisis scenarios. And this methodology takes into account security, adequacy, fuel security, but also very specifically extreme weather events. And these regional crisis scenarios identified are the basis for member states to also identify national crisis scenarios and ultimately to prepare risk preparedness plans. And we believe that by grounding these risk preparedness plans in regional and national consistency among member states planning and also the cooperation among member states. And okay, so you don't see my camera because there were issues. I hope you can still listen to me. I will continue. So these plans have to be coordinated among member states. So that's why member states have to share their draft plans, and they are due in April next year, 2021. And then also the final plans which are due in January 2022, they will be assessed by the Commission, and the Commission may issue an opinion. And some of the measures in these plans, because these plans, what they do is they contain all the measures that member states have envisaged to address, to prepare, to prevent first, to prepare for, and to mitigate a crisis. Well, some of the measures that are in these plans, they have to be agreed regionally. And that is because the risk preparedness regulation has introduced a very innovative element, which is the mechanism of assistance, whereby member states shall offer assistance to each other by means of measures that have been agreed regionally in case of a crisis or to prevent a crisis. And that is with the ultimate goal of protecting public safety and personal security. But also, when we are in a crisis, member states, crisis caused, for example, by extreme weather events, member states will have to inform each other and also inform the Commission. And they do so using a platform that is called the Electricity Coordination Group. That is a group with member states, NSOE, which is I didn't say it before, with the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Electricity, and also ASA, which is the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. And when member states inform us, what they need to say is, well, what are the reasons for the crisis, and also what are the measures that they are planning to put in place, which is quite significant. And this applies to crisis, as I said, but not only to crisis. It also applies, and it's very important, to early warning situations. So what the regulation says, the risk preparedness regulation, is that when member states have reliable information that something may occur, they have to issue an early warning to the Electricity Coordination Group, so to other member states, so that they are aware about a possible situation. And in order to do this early warning, one of the sources of information that typically informs this, adequacy assessments, short-term adequacy assessments. And this brings me to close the loop in the presentation to the first point, because also one of the tasks that the regulation imposed on NSOE was to develop a methodology for short-term and seasonal adequacy assessments. And that is very important because it's the first time actually that we have a mandatory methodology to carry out such assessments. And NSOE already used that for their summer outlook in 2020. And what you can see is that one of the elements that is being addressed in these adequacy assessments, seasonal adequacy assessments, are precisely the likelihood and impact of extreme weather events. So thus providing the opportunity to prepare in advance, be better prepared, and adopt the necessary measures. And I think that's it. I wanted to give you a bit this overview. I hope it was clear. And if we have some time extra at the end, I would be happy also to perhaps bring a couple of ideas on the protection of critical infrastructure.
Coordination. Thank you, Beatrice. That was a really interesting setting around the European approach. I particularly like the fact that you're calling out cooperation and coordination, and I'm sure that we'll be coming back to that in the question and answer session. So our next panelist is Laurent Schmidt. Laurent is the Secretary General of ENTSO-E, which, as Beatrice said, is the representative body of the European Transmission System Operators. And Laurent has been the Secretary General there since 2017. And Laurent is an industry leader on smart grids. So Laurent, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and thank you to Eurelectric to invite us to this very interesting panel. Very happy to contribute and give insight on how our TSO community is implied onto these resiliency matters. Of course, resiliency is at the core of our TSO community business, and it is not something which has been developed recently. It has historically been put in place through the electrical network code. I would like to remind everyone the importance of the requirement for generators, demand connection codes, system operation guideline, as well as emergency response codes, which are really the rule book for managing the grid security. And while we see the constraint and complexity of the power system in Europe expanding, there is a continuous process to add and improve the way the resiliency is being managed. I would like to take, for instance, two examples of how we do this. We mostly do this through lesson learned through real events, and I would like to refer here, for instance, to the solar eclipse, which has happened in 2015, where our TSO community really prepared well in advance the consequence of the solar eclipse. I remind that it was the key matter was to be able to manage 20 gigawatt of drop of solar PV in less than 1 hour. So it is not something which is happening without very strong anticipation and coordination between TSOs. And in that specific case, various measures were decided between TSO, whether in terms of increasing amount of reserve or curtailing certain interconnection, as well as thinking on impacting the amount of PVs supplying to the system during a short period of time. So that was one example of event. Each time such event happens, ENTSO-E does produce a report which analyzes expose the consequence, how the events was managed, and takes, I would say, lessons out of this event. Similarly, we had another events in 2017 with the cold spell, which was extremely cold period of few days, which impacted few countries in the center of Europe. And here the complexity was to coordinate the outages of the various, or anticipate the outages of the various generation assets, as well as basically coordinate the analysis of the impact of the event across various grid systems. So what was again one of the outcome of that incident? Fortunately, was not any incident on the grid itself, but the TSO community, for instance, decided to design new sets of critical situation awareness signal, which have been lately rolled out into regional security coordinators and into the roadmap of future regional control center. So what all these events show is the crucial importance of regional coordination and the need to grow the effort into that space. I want to highlight that there is a large amount of ongoing work to increase the amount of regional coordination, the services provided through this coordination, which were further defined through the clean energy package, particularly in areas such as what was highlighted by Beatrice, short-term adequacy calculation as an example. We were very happy, I think, last month to announce, for instance, the launch of a new tool being used by RSCs to do that short-term adequacy calculation with models which are consistent with the seasonal outlook historical calculation, which the TSO community was performing through ENSOE. So that gives, on a week-ahead basis, a view to various countries of the impact of certain risks and particularly the weather impact. So the deployment also of this critical grid situation alarms, but the community is also working on further tools for doing regional security coordination. So we definitely see, we are very happy to see that historically the power system security in Europe has been very well managed by the TSO community. Having said that, we realize that the growing complexity, both in terms of events, but in terms also of distributed energy resources being connected to the system, requires to constantly improve this process. Recently, we had, as what was mentioned by Beatrice, strong involvement into the preparation of the risk preparedness methodologies. The regulation is welcomed by our community as a very important step to basically be able to mitigate risk at regional level. Recently, I think I have one or two slides, if it's still time to show them. Recently, our teams have been implied into all the analysis which have been doing with the member states, running some questionnaires to try to identify what are the type of extreme events to consider, and we see really the weather-related events coming regularly as a feedback from the member state as very important event to anticipate, and trying to classify the likelihood and severity of these various events. And we are part of the task of the coordination group together with ACER and Commission, very much supporting the development of this regulation. Just to conclude on this interaction, want to highlight the importance that resiliency is a continuous process improvement because the system itself does complexify, and so it's very important to do regular ex-post report analysis and to consider basically evolution of all the tools being put in place. That's really what we focus on in our ENSOE TSO community. And we do see a new requirement to come in the future of the evolution of the system, particularly related to the lower amount of inertia being seen in some area of the power system in Europe. And that's probably going to be one of the elements to be further considered in the future management of these high-risk situations. So very happy to contribute into the next question and answer session, should you have any specific question on these various elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you for that. That was really interesting. My takeaway from that really is this aspect of lessons learned from various incidents in the past, and then also this process of continuous improvement, because, as you say, the system is becoming more complex all the time, and the challenges are changing as system inertia changes. So thank you very much, Laurent, and there's a lot to come back to in the question and answers there. Thank you again. If we could turn to the third panelist, who is Mark McGranahan. Mark McGranahan, Mark has authored more than 70 technical papers and articles on topics ranging from power quality to extra high voltage systems. Currently, Mark is the Vice President of Innovation at EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute, and he's going to be able to bring us a perspective from EPRI. Thank you very much, Mark.
Trying to unmute myself here. Does that work?
That's perfect, Mark.
Okay. I really appreciate the invitation to be part of this panel representing the Electric Power Research Institute. No question that the topic of resiliency is one of the most important ones facing the entire industry. We could go to my first of a couple of slides here. And I thought what I would talk about is, just since we're a research organization, if you're not familiar with EPRI, we're a nonprofit research organization based in the US, but we have members throughout the world and very active here in Europe with great cooperation with NSOE and EDSO. First slide, please. So I thought I'd talk about some of the research priorities that I think we're facing. And I think Lauren's point about the complex nature of the electric power system and the fact that a complex system like this can be disturbed in many different ways is exactly right in terms of the impact of resilience. Taking a complex system viewpoint of resilience, we have to look at kind of all of the different possible scenarios, and it starts with climate change. It starts with understanding and being able to make projections of climate change and the impacts of climate change, of the extreme events associated with that, and the impacts both on the resources that are available in terms of energy resources, and then also the grid itself. And so we look at, as a first challenge, looking at what the global climate change projections look like, what the hazards are that can be created by the climate change, and then start with the impact on both the demand, the load, and the resources that are available. What does extreme heat and extreme cold mean in terms of heating and cooling loads on the system? Are we going to have enough resources to deal with that? We also have to look at the impact on the resources themselves, hurricanes that shut down wind generation. Lauren mentioned the solar eclipse, impacts on solar generation, impacts on energy coupling. Gas supply has been a major issue, which is still a big part of the flexibility of the grid. And so we have to understand those potential impacts going forward. And then we look at the grid itself and the T&D system impacts of these events, and the ability of the grid to survive these events. Does it change our design requirements of the grid? For instance, after Storm Sandy, many utilities, Con Edison in particular, changed their design criteria for flooding in the New York area, and rebuilt substations so that they could withstand higher flood levels than were previously the case, and that's true of many utilities. So we have to look at the design criteria of the system based on these projected climate changes and the impacts on the grid. And then finally, we have to look at solutions and technology and the availability of solutions to be able to deal with these impacts, both on the resource side and the grid side. If we could go to the next slide, I think one very important topic for the entire industry is how to evaluate these investments that are required to improve the reliability and resiliency of the grid. And we call that an investment framework. And right now we're working with utilities and stakeholders from around the world to identify some of the issues with what we call the value of resilience. So we're doing a pretty good job of looking at options for improving resiliency, whether they're options at the customer level and energy storage and PV and generation at the customer and community level, or if they're investments in the grid to improve the hardening of the grid, or having enough of adequacy of resources to deal with these high impact events. But every one of these solutions involves very significant investments. So it's important to look at what level of investment is justified, and then what is the optimum way to place to make the investment. If we can do targeted investment to protect critical infrastructure, is that more economical than investing in infrastructure for the entire grid? We talk about non-wires alternatives for reliability and grid investment. So we have to be able to look at all the different investment options and be able to identify the best investment options and then justify those. And so to justify them, we have to look at the changing probability of these events, involves probabilistic assessments, and being able to have some metrics to evaluate the benefits of those investments in terms of the avoided costs, which translates to the value of improved resiliency. So the value of resiliency is a big question, metrics to be able to evaluate that resiliency, and it's very different than kind of our traditional reliability metrics of customer minutes lost and time of restoration for traditional outages. I know it hits very close to home. My sister in the state of Oregon had to evacuate yesterday from her home, and after she's been out of power for 3 days due to wildfires in Oregon. And so, how do we, just look at investments to prevent things like wildfires or improve our immunity from events like that in terms of the grid. So it's a real difficult problem looking at this value equation. So I wanted to bring that up, and I think it's a good topic for discussion. And with that, maybe I'll leave it to the next speaker and look forward to the discussion session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. That was a really nice summary, and I think the reference to your sister and her the challenges in Oregon at the moment really brings it home to us that there are people behind all of these issues. So these are issues of policy and technology, but behind it there are people and their lives. And I'm sure that that's something that we'll come back to, the value of resilience and whether that value is changing and increasing, as certainly I believe it is, and also the requirement then for longer term investment. So then maybe just to introduce the final panelist, who's Gregorio Ogliaro. Gregorio is the Managing Director responsible for Accenture's utilities, transmission and distribution business for Europe. He's based in Milan, and Gregorio's current focus, I believe, is on digital grid innovation. So over to you, Gregorio.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Paddy. And first of all, I really appreciate the invite. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this morning. So thank you, Paddy and Euroelectric team. Yes, as you have anticipated, Accenture a few months ago has published a study entitled From Reliability to Resilience, Confronting the Challenges of Extreme Weather. This study is based on a survey that we did with more than 200 electric utility executives in 28 countries around the world and around 100 representatives from Europe. I would like to present you, let's say, 2 slides. The first one is about our key findings from our survey. And the second one is about our view on strategic imperative for utility to improve resilience. And I hope this will be useful in the debate this morning. if you can please go to the next slide. Yes, thank you very much. So this is really a very high level, summary of the finding. But as you can see, so the majority of utility executives recognize the increasing weather trend. So we don't need to discuss this more. As you can see, the percentage, 91% in Europe, they believe this is a reality, so the trend is given. But the second question that we ask should be worried a little bit us, because you can see that less than a quarter globally, but in Europe even less, 18% of the interviews of the people that we have interviewed, they feel very well prepared. So it means that the remaining people are not feeling very well prepared on this. Then we ask also, what do you feel are the, let's say, improvement priorities areas, in order to improve, let's say, resilience in the next 10 years? And you can see that besides, let's say, effective communication, that, as we said by Paddy and also other panelists, is key. It's very important communication during the event, but also, let's say, prior to the event, and accurate forecasting that absolutely is relevant, 10%, or let's say to invest in the traditional reinforcement of the network, undergrounding, flood protection, and so on. I would like to point your attention on the last two. So 25% for restoration effectiveness. So in terms of, at the end means optimize emergency process, restoration, strategic parts, and so on. And also increase system flexibility, both from a operational standpoint and also from a commercial flexibility. So we are talking about here network redundancy, network configuration, microgrids, but also the integration between distributed generation and storage. Then if you can go, let's say, to the next slide, please. Here, and my last slide, by the way, here I would like only to present you, let's say, a summary of what we think are the strategic imperative for developing a great resilience. As you can see here, there are three different steps. The first one we call establish the foundation of resilience. And here we really believe that utility need to take the leadership, not only defining what resilience is, because frankly, I believe that is not clear and shared definition globally on resilience. Resilience is more a cultural mindset, in my opinion. It's completely different, as Mark was saying before, by reliability. So these are different metrics. They are related in some way, but they are distinct. So the second things that we believe utility need to do is also promoting this culture of resilience, and this should means that there need to be an effective governance, cross-functional, within each utility. Then, of course, creating even a deeper dialogue with customer, with government, with regulator, with other stakeholders. As Laurent was saying, is very important also the cooperation across the TSO, the transmission system operator, because we are in Europe in a very high interconnected system. But also, and this is something that Mark already anticipated, is very important, let's say, how we monitor and assess resilience. It's not easy to assess resilience, frankly speaking. When we help our client, I remember that we have a list of about 50 different topics, to have a score about resilience. So, and this first step, let's say, also is very important from a technology standpoint, the help that digital technology can give. Let's imagine that all the scenario-based climate model and the various impact on the different portion of the topology of the network are supported by artificial intelligence. And this could help us a lot. The second step is really about to build the resilience network. And here utility, I would say that they have three different way to do that. The traditional way is, if you want, is harden the network, which need to be one of the key ingredients, of course. This is an effective solution, but is also very, let's say, expensive and with long lead time. And then we believe that the other two solutions are around, as we said, greater flexibility and also, let's say, keep a more effective, let's say, restoration process. And again, here, digital technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital twin, active management system are key to address this part. And the third step, I believe that the utility need also to have a look about what we call emerging resilience solution, like DR and storage behind the meter. In the future, also vehicle to grid that will be, let's say, a key player in providing the proper flexibility to the distribution network. And then, of course, let's say the strategy need to be also, let's say, calibrated according to the type of customer that we have. For example, let's say, I give you just an example, utility in Australia, Horizon Power, they have developed a standalone system for those customers that are in the rural areas. So these customers are no more connected to the grid, and let's say utility is owning and managing on their behalf the storage and the cap generator. So I hope that this is a quick summary of our research, and also, if you want, our point of view about resilience, and this will help to provide some insight for this morning discussion. So over to you, Patty.
Thank you very much, Gregorio. It's really interesting to see the results of your research and listen to the different perspectives on whether it's the hardening of the network or increased flexibility and increased technology and digitization that are going to provide the solutions here, and also the difference between your sense of reliability on the one hand and resilience on the other, and how we may need to think differently in the future. So after those contributions from the panelists, I'd like to start the discussion process going. Maybe just to loop back to Beatrice, first of all. Beatrice, you came at this very much from a European policy perspective. Is there anything that you've heard from Laurent, Marc, and Gregorio that you found particularly interesting or insightful or relevant from your perspective?
Thank you very much, Paddy. Well, I found the discussions particularly very interesting, and I found it very, very interesting what Gregorio showed in his slide about the results, particularly in Europe. I was looking particularly at that column about the interest, and I found it very interesting that I think it was 43% of the interviewees suggested that it was an area to improve was to increase the flexibility of our system, which is a bit a summary of where we are going. We are going to have increased systems and that have a higher penetration of renewables. We're going to have systems that are more difficult to predict, and we need, and also much more electrification in our energy system, and that creates a lot of or higher needs for flexibility than what we have had until now. And I think this is a message that we keep hearing, and we are looking much more at the sources and what can provide this flexibility. And I was very glad to see that level of awareness. Of course, you were targeting a very specialized audience, but I found it particularly interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beatrice. Could I ask the same question of Laurent? Laurent, you again look at this from a DSO perspective and looking at the lessons learned. Thinking about the presentations from the other three panelists, Laurent, is there anything that you would like to highlight there? And maybe, Laurent, before you answer that question, just to remind the audience and the participants that hopefully, if time allows, there will be an opportunity for people to put questions and to spur discussion with inputs and insights from the audience as well. So feel free to interact with the platform as well. Thank you, Laurent.
Yeah, so what I think 2 points came to my mind listening particularly to Marc and Gregorio. The first one is the question on the value of resiliency, and among the various development of methodologies related to the clean energy package, one which is also extremely important is the methodology for regional adequacy and pan-European adequacy calculation, where constantly come back this question of value of lost loads, and few concepts and how to manage these critical situations. I think these are elements which will see some development in the future. And what I would like to also highlight is the complexity of the required simulation and modeling behind that kind of calculation. That is a really complex scenario analysis. The other element coming from Gregorio is this notion of how much will the grid be able to rely on the grid edge for this future resiliency and this community, and that Paddy goes straight to the topic of TSO DSO cooperation and basically active system management and how to integrate DER into the future network codes so that we balanced well the resiliency brought by the main infrastructure as compared to resilient solutions brought in communities at the edge of the system. So how to ensure a proper balance between the two.
Yeah, Laurent, that's a really nice reference there to the importance of the community that's outside of the electricity networks but connected to it, and what part they can play in this, and indeed whether that brings challenges of resilience. I'm sure it does on the one hand, but equally that cooperation and coordination can bring great solutions and benefits as well. Mark, I think that's something that you're interested in. Maybe you'd like to elaborate on that, or indeed go back to some of the points brought up by Gregorio, Laurent, and Beatrice in their presentations.
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic. One thing that I thought came out of Gregorio's discussion at the end that I think is very important, and it's a difficult one, and that's the relative roles of the stakeholders, especially the community and the customer, and then the TSO and the DSO. But mentioning the Horizon Power example of where the utility installs and manages local microgrids as part of the system design, I thought was very interesting, and it's a challenge for us at the TSO and DSO level to incorporate those options into our planning process and then into our operations. So I think that relative roles of the community and the customer in dealing with resilience, and it has a very important policy and regulatory impacts as well in terms of how we enable the best solutions as part of the resiliency equation. So I think that's a really important discussion area.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Mark. And perhaps I could ask Gregorio as well. Gregorio, do you want to pull anything particular out of the contributions?
Yes, sure. So I like for sure the contribution related to the continuous improvement concept, because at the end, investing in resilience, it means for utility that at the end of the process, so after the post-event, the objectives need to be more resilient than the previous event. Is a simple consideration, but this is the objective of the continuous improvement. Then I like a lot the cooperation, and I believe that in Europe, at least, we are quite fortunate. We have also this kind of cooperation between regulator, ACER, and SOE. And then also, I like also what Laurent said about inertia, because inertia is becoming a critical point at the TSO level with the increase of renewable connected to the grid. So the way to measure really inertia for a TSO, I believe that will be critical, in particular for those TSO in Europe that they have a high degree of connection with renewable. Very interesting debate. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gregorio. We've mentioned the value, the increase in the changing value of resilience, and Mark, is that something that you could expand on? Is that something that EPRI has been thinking about, how to actually value this? Because you mentioned investment, and if you take the example of Storm Sandy and changing the location of transmission stations and flood resilience, that's a big physical investment. justifying that requires a value analysis.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like, you know, when utilities propose investments to improve resilience right after a big hurricane, you know, usually there's no way to say no to that. But a year after that, you know, regulators don't remember, and the investments are harder to justify. And so we need a more objective way to evaluate the benefit of investments in resilience, so that all the stakeholders can agree it makes sense, regardless of who makes them, whether it's community or the utility or the customer. But somehow dealing with the probabilistic aspect and the changing climate conditions and what the impacts of those are on the required grid and customer characteristics, we have to be able to put dollar numbers on it. It's something that the national labs in the US are working on. Lawrence Berkeley Labs has a calculator that we call the ICE calculator, the interruption calculator, economics, and people use that for traditional reliability metrics, but it really doesn't go beyond events that are very low probability or events that last more than 24 hours in terms of the impact on the grid. So we need to bring in the probabilistic approaches and come up with the metrics for using those so that all the stakeholders can agree on the justification of these investments. And it's an area of very significant activity. We're supposed to deliver a kind of a roadmap identifying the issues and an approach for dealing with them by the end of the year, but there's more questions than answers at the moment.
Thanks, Mark. And actually, when you mentioned probabilistic interactions, it made me think about what Beatrice and Laurent was saying, particularly about the cooperation. Beatrice, you mentioned it in your presentation, the idea of within the community and making sure that there's mutual cooperation, coordination, and support. So maybe there's something that you'd like to expand on there, or possibly Laurent as well, in that whole area about cooperation and coordination.
Yes, Paddy, thank you very much. Indeed, this is one of the lessons learned. That's why in the EU legislation, it requires extensive consultation at every step. So when you're looking at risk scenarios, when you are doing the planning for measures, the regulation requires that stakeholders are consulted, and this includes so the operators, the regulators, the ministries, and this is at national level, also the utilities. But then what the regulation brings now, and that's something that we are particularly looking at because we think it's a bit the missing gap, is the cross-border cooperation. So this is not only within your community, but it also looks at the member state next door, because we are an internal market of the EU in a highly interconnected system, which is therefore vulnerable to cascading effects. So I fully agree with this, and this is something that we are working on. And of course, much will depend on a thorough implementation of the regulation, because if you just do a tick in a box, then it will certainly not work. But the Commission will be there working together with member states and using the EU platforms to ensure the coordination, the consultation in plans, so that member states are aware also of the measures that other member states are likely to put in place in case of a crisis, and also to prevent a crisis. And we will be providing them support and tools on how possibly to do that. And just to say, I was very interested because I forgot to mention at the beginning on what Mark was mentioning and the calculations they are doing. And I will very much look forward to reading the roadmap by the end of the year. Really very interesting discussions that we are also having ourselves in the EU.
That's great. Thanks, Beatrice. And Laurent, do you want to speak to that area of intersystem and inter-system operator cooperation?
Yeah, so I would say the technical entities to ensure that regional cooperation are existing and have been created several years ago, known as Regional Security Coordinator. I think the DSO did realize the need for regional cooperation on technical calculation and the coordination of flows several years ago. And what we see is the clean energy package is progressively increasing the need for adding services to this cooperation. That's very important. When we were into the discussion of clean energy package, we also highlighted as a community the need for not only organizing technical cooperation between TSOs, but also aligning it with discussion between regulators in the same regions, as well as governments. And so that's why the risk preparedness is very interesting, because it's very important that governments share their perception of the value of resiliency, because it may be different from one country to another. So I think it's very important to, on one side, have technical entity like RCCs, but also link it properly with the regulators and governments in these areas.
Thanks, Laurent. Gregorio, if I could move to you for a second, and this is a question from the audience, where in your survey, 18% of respondents felt very well prepared, and I suppose that begs the question then about who sets the gold standard, or what areas have you seen where resilience is tackled really well, and what is it that you think makes people feel that they're well prepared? And of course, that then begs the question: do they just feel it, or is it because they're optimistic, or because they're realistic about this? So maybe who's setting the gold standard around this?
Yeah, maybe I believe that. So the reason why we have only 18 people that they feel well prepared is because at the same times they feel that, let's say, distributed generation need to be part of the equation, no? But they feel at the end the challenge of doing this, because at the end, if we are saying that turning distributed generation into a resilient asset, if you want, require a major change in operation policy and in regulation, in network visibility and control. So, for example, from a technical standpoint, I believe that the ability to increase visibility and control is key, in particular in the distributed generation connected to the DSO, so to the distribution network. But this means that at the end that we need to invest also in IoT. If you want also, we need to have strong infrastructure in place, a communication infrastructure in place. So I believe that, for example, 5G, edge computing, so the new, let's say, digital technology will enter in the game. So I believe that probably there is also this kind of situation, no? Because they recognize the opportunity, but at the same time they face also, they see also some challenges. In terms of maybe gold standard is difficult to say, but I see few cases, very good cases of resilience in US, but also in Europe. In US, I believe that let's say in emergency management and the storm response, we have key utilities like Florida Power and Light or Duke that are probably the best. But in particular, I like the case of utility in California, San Diego Gas and Electric is part of Sempra Group, because in my opinion, what they did is a good summary of all the different ingredients that we need to have to shape an effective resilience strategy. Because for them, the key ingredients were consumer dialogue and involvement. So they involve also the customer, not only during the wildfire, let's say, mitigation process, but also to get customer feedbacks in terms of the action that they have defined. Then, let's say, they hire also many meteorological experts to work together with their team in order to create analytics to predict this kind of event. They also, let's say, install IoT devices like cameras in the network in order, let's say, to evaluate where the fire is and in order to address better the field force during this event. And then, of course, they also did what many utilities are doing. So they hardened the network, changing 40,000 poles from wood to steel. But in any case, they set up first a clear, let's say, strategy and governance in place with the right resilience, let's say, mindset. In UK, we have also good examples. So if you think about UKPN, which is the UK Power Network, which is the largest DSO, they are working, for example, on local flexibility, which is in any case a way also to increase local resilience. We have one other example at Enel, for example, the cooperation that they are doing with the European Space Agency in order to, let's say, get the image from the satellite in order to proper manage also vegetation. All these are good, very good example in the direction of a proper resilience.
That's great, Gregorio, and that's a really nice way to sum it up as well. We're coming to the end of our time this morning. What I'd like to do very briefly is thank our 4 fabulous presenters, Gregorio, Patrice, Laurent, and Mark. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Eurelectric team that have put this together. Thank you to the audience and for your interaction with the questions. Just a shout out for the second part of this webinar series, which happens on the 30th of September. It's about resilience in times of cyber threat, and it'll be moderated by Michael Jesperger from Transnet BV. Michael is the transmission co-chair on the European TSO DSO platform, and there's really strong cooperation going on there. And for me, the highlights of the discussion today, I think it goes without question, and it showed from Gregorio's survey, we all agree that extreme weather is a given, it's happening, that the challenge is rising. I think we all agree that the value of resilience is increasing significantly. I think we all agree that there are policy dimensions and investment dimensions to this, but there's also huge opportunity with innovation and technology development, digitization. Laurent called out the fact that active system management and at the edge of the distribution network, whether it's distributed generation or other distribution services, is going to be a key part of providing some resilience here. And I think most important of all, through the course of the discussion, I think there's an illustration that behind this and the back of this are people and customers, and electricity has a really significant and beneficial impact on their lives. And we've got to remember communication and involvement with communities and people as we go through. So thank you once again, everybody. It's been a real pleasure this morning, and see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank
Thank
you,
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.